Welcome back again to the Ivory Tower Collections. In today's video, we're going to work on the 5200 controller once again. Now, I have another video I did several years ago where I go through a refurbishment process that I used to use back then for the 5200 controller that basically consisted of using some little foil dot squares that I used to cut from old HVAC tape like this. And that method can still be used and can work. However, I think there's a far better solution that's available today, not only because it just works really well, but because I think it's a more permanent solution, it takes less time, and therefore is worth the cost. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about this. This is the replacement flex circuit and membrane button kit from Atari Repair Parts. And what's great about this kit is that it not only provides all brand new replacement parts, but all of these parts are gold plated as well. Now that's important because it shouldn't really have the same issues with oxidation that the original flex circuit on the controllers had. In addition, there's a couple of improvements. The contact surfaces on all of these buttons are a little bit bigger than the original graphite rubber surface was on the original buttons. The fire buttons have two fairly decent sized sets of contacts for both sides of them. And additionally, the replacement flex itself is better built than the Atari originals. It has larger contact area for all of the different button connections. And again, this is also gold plated, but the actual flex circuit itself is a little bit thicker and therefore has thicker traces internally. So again, this is just a more sturdy solution. It's also not very expensive for a complete setup for one of your controllers. So again, for the time that it takes to do this, you'd kind of want to invest this money just to make it a one-time deal, because in theory, you probably won't have to worry about the controller's contact buttons again in the future. So let's go through the process of replacing this out. So we need to take the controller apart. Now here's the method I use now for taking these controllers apart. We're going to start by focusing on the 3 screws on the bottom. They're just Phillips screws, so you just need a number 2 Phillips screwdriver to take these loose. You're basically going to want to take the controller halves and separate them apart. Now what you're going to find is that there are some posts that kind of snap into each other on this portion here where the keypad is, and that kind of makes it difficult to take the controller apart. So what I use is I have a little spudger here. You could also use the flat blade of a small screwdriver, but that could put some marks on the plastic, so just be careful with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the spudger tool that I've got here, and then I'm just going to give it a little bit of a twist upwards to help me separate the plastic, just like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully go ahead and lift the rest of this off. And I'm being careful because part of the flex circuit that is for the start, pause, and reset buttons is still attached and will be held in place by those buttons. So again, I'm just going to lift that off. Now the reason why I did it this way is because you're going to have to remove this bezel and the buttons as part of the replacement, but I find it easier nowadays to do it using this method, because then what I can do is I can reach from underneath the controller here. There's some little notches up in here, which is where the catches are for that bezel that holds the buttons in place. So what you can use is either, part of a small flat-bladed screwdriver. Again, I'm just going to probably use this spudger here, and I'm just going to get in there and just kind of weasel my way in like that. There we go. And just pop it loose. And then there we go. We've got the top portion of the controller completely removed. So now that I have these components taken apart, I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of the parts I'm not going to need. So these are the old membrane buttons for the start, pause, and reset. Here is the old keypad buttons. And likewise, here are the side fire buttons. Some of them, a lot of them, only had just one contact point originally. We're not going to need any of this old rubber button stuff anymore. We've got replacements, so you can just dispose of them at this point. And then we have the rest of the controller portion. What's going to get replaced here is this flex membrane. So I usually start by removing the portion of it that's held on tight where the fire buttons were. Now, Atari used some pretty strong double-sided tape on this, so you're going to have to work with it a little bit. And again, you're replacing this circuit, this flex circuit, so you don't need to be too concerned if it should happen to tear or rip on you. There we go. And then for the rest of it, it's actually on a tray. So I'm just going to take my finger here and I'm just going to lift up on this. And the rest of the flex circuit is actually inserted into a ZIF socket down here. So I'm just going to wiggle this back and forth. And there we go. And now I can peel off the rest of the old flex circuit off of the tray that it sat on for the number pad. Now at this point it would be a good idea to go ahead and clean up all of your plastic parts that you have. And I also want to bring your attention to a couple of things. You'll notice that there's some old tape residue up here on this tray. Sometimes this comes off with the old flex circuit and it's not much of a problem. But in this particular case it didn't. And I'm here to tell you that it's really not doing its job anymore. So I'm probably going to have to use like some Goo Gone or something to get this off of here, because I would prefer this to be a smooth surface. And that's because the replacement flex circuit that comes in the kit already has some adhesive double-sided tape that's attached to it on the bottom. But what you're going to find is that's not going to want to stick very well unless it's got a clean surface to adhere to. And the old sticker residue here is going to get in the way. Same thing here with the fire buttons. Although I will state that it's not as big of a deal on these, just because with everything assembled the way it is, it pretty much stays in place. But it's still a good idea if you can to just kind of remove some of this old sticker residue as much as you possibly can. So I'm going to go ahead and get the plastics on this controller cleaned up, and then I'll be right back to finish up the assembly process. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish rebuilding this controller. So I'm going to actually start with the plate that the keypad sits on. And we're going to get our new flex circuit, and I'm going to start by peeling off this self-adhesive strip, just the backing of it, so that the tape on there is exposed. And then I'm going to apply this. Now, it's important that you have this in the right direction. You'll see that there are some alignment pegs and they're not quite directly centered. Well, what you want is you want these alignment pegs to be offset so that when you apply this, the metal fingers will be towards the tapered edge. The edge of this plastic shelf, if you want to call it that, is actually a little bit rounded and tapered off. And that's the side that's going to sit into the controller like this. Or we want this flex circuit to be oriented in the same way. So I'm just going to align it over those pegs like that. And then I'm going to use a cloth to wipe down and press that onto the plate. And again, this is just to hold it down. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put a fold onto the sides of the flex. And this is just to make it a little easier for us on the next step that we're about to go through. So now what I need to do is we need to also fold this part back. So put like a little bit of a fold in that, but be careful, don't crease it down too hard, just enough that it's going to stay out of the way, because the way that this goes back in now, and this is probably one of the most trickiest parts of this whole process, because you need to keep these sides bent down, and at the same time, this part here needs to be behind these three support pegs, like that. And then you also need to plug these fingers into the socket down here. So I find that it's a little easier if you start by kind of loosening the socket. This will make it a little easier to insert the new flex circuit into it. And you want to seat it in there as much as you can. And then, while folding down those sides and getting that socket reinserted where it needs to go. So this is kind of a tricky process. Again, this is probably the hardest part of getting this put back together, is just getting this new flex circuit in place. And I'm just going to get it all lined up here as best I can. I'm going to get those little posts for the tray lined up into the controller where they go. And I'm going to push it all down, just like that. And now I can get these straightened back out, and we can see now it's just a matter of getting the sides of the flex circuit reinstalled. So to do that, you're going to carefully peel back the adhesive, and then you're going to want to line them up. You're going to see that there is a notch on the very bottom center of this, and that needs to sit with a little post peg at the very bottom. It's going to be impossible for me to show this on the camera, so you just have to kind of trust me it's there. But there's a little post that's there, and you're just going to line that up and you're going to push that down all the way flush with it as much as you possibly can. And then again, I'm going to use like part of a cloth here just to kind of help push that down into place securely. There we go. And now you can see why it was so important earlier that I was trying to clean the old adhesive off of the controller plastic, because it makes it a lot easier for this new adhesive to stick in place. I'm now going to do the same thing with the other side. Again, it had some adhesive tape that I've peeled loose, and just like the other side, there is a notch on the bottom of it, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line it up. And again, I'm going to use just a little piece of cloth here. There we go. And now that should be in place. And that's it. We've got this part in place, and we can set that down. Now we're ready for the rest of the controller buttons. So we'll start with the side fire buttons. It does not matter. These are exactly the same on both sides. So I'm just going to take one of the new button sets here, and I'm just going to put it into the bracket, like so. And then that's just going to slide in. There's some little slots on the side for these little brackets to slide into, and it's just going to slide in just like that. I'm going to take the one on the other side, do the same thing. And then we need to get our number pad. So I've got my new number pad here with the gold-plated contacts on it. The rubber membrane has the same kind of holes in it that was on the flex circuit. So you're just going to line up as best you can over those little posts. So now I've got the controller at this point. Now comes the next important part. You want to make sure on these potentiometers that the bottom potentiometer is exactly at the 6 o'clock position and the top potentiometer is exactly in the 9 o'clock position. And that's because when you go to put the rest of the controller housing on, this needs to be centered as much as possible so that those little slots, those little oval openings on those slider plates fit over perfectly on top of the potentiometers, because if it doesn't, you're going to find that the controller is not going to respond properly. And the way that I do this after I've got these lined up is I'm going to hold onto the controller and try to keep it centered as much as possible. And then I also need to make sure that this top portion of the flex circuit that has the start, pause, and reset goes through the side of a controller opening like that. And then I'm going to carefully, while keeping it all centered, try to place it down. Okay. It's all snapped into place and the controller moves around exactly the way it needs to. Now it's just a matter of folding this down into place and just kind of hold it as best you can while taking the top row buttons, make sure you've got them aligned properly with start where it needs to go. So I'm just going to just manually hold that into place. I'm going to get the bezel and I'm just going to push it into place. Now the buttons may be a little bit misaligned, so I'm just going to use I'm going to use my little spudger here to just kind of push them around a little bit, make sure they get there. There we go. That's now in place. And now I can go ahead and reassemble the controller. And there we go. This controller is reassembled with all new gold-plated contact pads and buttons. And that's it. That's how you get the new rebuild kits installed into the CX52 controller with the parts from AtariRepairParts.com. Hopefully this video was helpful for you guys, and I'll catch you another time. Thanks.